Good evening, everyone. So this will be our introduction class. Welcome to the introduction class for the quality revision program. I know all of you must be very anxious regarding the results, the marks, or for that matter, what would be the outcome of this prelims. But please don't think about all that because right now your goal must be to put the effort to travel the path, fine, or the low road less traveled, though this road has been traveled by many before, but as of now it is less traveled because it is your ambition and it is your motivation that will drive you through this probably the phase of uncertainty. The uncertainty is because of various factors and not just the examination, right? So we would be today discussing about the very first class where the important issues related to the public administration, this special course that is there, fine, which is the specific revision program, and revision come obviously quality enrichment. When we say this enrichment, so enrichment process is a very long-term process. It is not just mechanical. It is not just a push button system that okay, today you will do something and you'll just become something else, right? So it is not that easy to think of that this process is like a kind of you can say jump start process, right? You take time, you have to evolve, right? And this evolution obviously requires a certain amount of understanding and consciousness regarding what you're doing, right? So today we'll be focusing on those aspects. Let me first give you a very vivid, a very brief, a very simple picture of what you are about to witness in your mains examination, right? When we talk about public administration and especially the paper one, right? So there are a lot of discrepancies in what we study and what exactly is asked in the examination, right? First, this is a myth. Please just remove this negativity. It is not like that, right? Because you have a lot of questions, you have 8 questions and you have to choose certain important questions unless the question has come in question part A question 1 and part B question 5, okay, otherwise you are not compelled to write it, fine. So you can always expect, let's say, one question or one part of certain question to be something which may be little complicated, right? When you say complicated, are you trying to justify the nature or the language of the question, fine, or you're trying to justify that okay, the concept that has been asked you have never heard of, fine. So there are two different things. One is the language. So the complexity of the language is no measurement, is no barometer of the conceptual difficulty of the question. The conceptual difficulty of the question is a different thing, right? So if you are not able to understand or decode the language, probably the way it has been circumlocuted, it has been roundabouted, just manipulated, right? Then you must not fear the question, right? Because if you're not understanding, you can very safely leave that question and go for some other question, right? But if you think that okay, yeah, conceptually the questions are something which we have never heard of, then probably you have not worked hard enough. So if you are leaving then any question, that means that is your mistake. If you're leaving a question because of its complexity of the way it has been asked, okay, then probably it's okay, it's fine, that can be acceptable, right? But when we say conceptual, so conceptually you have to understand things. When we say conceptually, it is not some big word, it is a very simple concept, it is a very simple terminology which is used to make you understand the core principles of something, find the foundation of something. That is what concept is about, right? So when we understand the foundation of something, fine, then we can build on this foundation certain other stories. We can build on this foundation a bigger structure, okay, a bigger system, fine, or make it more complex. But unless our foundation is strong, we cannot do so. So if you are getting things conceptually tough, right? That means somewhere you have not tried to put enough effort to understand it, right? As far as paper 2 is concerned, there are various problems, no doubt, fine. The vastness, at least paper 1 is defined, and we know that okay, there can be n number of dimensions, at least we know n, fine. In paper 2, obviously we are not able to comprehend that okay, what could be the actual way of asking this particular topic or issue, right? Because when we are talking about paper 2, even though the topics are simple, right, the content is more or less understandable. If we give a good reading of second ARC, right, and we have, at least I would not say don't get into a research aspect, but if we have a basic understanding of the second ARC with the paper 2 content, especially from any standard book like Arora Goel or Fadia and Fadia, or for that matter, let us talk about this, what is this, IGNOU, right? So if we have a basic understanding of that, basic here is obviously about the simple facts which are necessary to be known, right? And on top of that, if we are obviously understanding the dimensions of that particular topic from the IIP, from the second ARC, and then supplementing some content from the Indian Institute of Public Administration journals, even though that may not be very mandatory, but we use it, fine, as a means, as a way of caution, fine, so that okay, in case we encounter some random topics, right, so we must know that, right? But paper 2 has this problem that okay, if the question is asked, we are able to understand the question, but problem is that what should be the content, right? So there are some basic facts. If we know some basic facts, fine, and we develop our understanding based on those facts, those information which are necessary, fine, and then try to interpret that fact or that information in a way that okay, what can be the possible aspects in which this can be asked. If we do this simple exercise, then you will realize that it will help you in, to an extent, taming the paper 2, right? Also, one important aspect of paper 2 is that you must have lot of information and data, lot of you can say knowledge about committees and commissions, their recommendations, right? Various comparative examples also, fine. For example, if Rajasthan is doing something and Andhra is doing something, so how we can compare these two and how we can use this information, right? If the RTI is successful in the southern states and not in the northern states, then what could be the possible reason for that, right? Or for that matter, if I say local governments, the women participation has drastically increased even in some backward states also, right? Thanks to the self-help group movement, thanks to the influence of NGOs and media, and some specific welfare schemes initiated by the state governments as well as the central government. So if you have this kind of awareness, if this kind of information, which is obviously available with certain sources, we have certain sources from where we can get all this. It's not a big deal, fine. If you're reading GSN newspaper properly every day, right, at least 6 months before the examination, so you can capture all these elements, right? So getting back to our idea, so paper 1, so today we'll be discussing the important issues, right? That is more important. So the 2020 I think, is it visible to you, right? Okay, just a second. Fine. So this 2020 QRP, right, is a very important you can say step towards somewhere understanding, trying to understand the basic premises on which we can attempt the paper in a good manner, right, without bypassing or endangering the knowledge that we have acquired, right? So we have to somewhere manipulate the same knowledge, right? So let us if we talk about, right, paper 1, so I'll be talking about some important topics today, okay, that we will obviously take during these classes, right? And we'll talk about them, and we'll try to obviously solve a variety of questions on them, especially when we talk about paper 2. Many questions are asked which seem to be that we cannot write answers to them, but we will be able to do it, right? Paper 1 obviously has again the same problem that I talked to you, that conceptually, okay, the things may seem to be little lost, the things may seem to be little, unheard of, right? But it is not so, right? So if we take paper 1, now see, if we analyze the last 3 years paper, I'm taking last 3 years because let's say till 13-14 the paper was a little way out of the context, right? But there was nothing much wrong with the paper, but the way the marking and the patterns were there, they were a little slow. From 15 onwards, we see a little mellow down of the question paper, right? They were more defined, it seemed to be more predictable. 16 onwards, the question paper seems to be more or less rather defined by the syllabus itself, right? Even the few questions we see here and there, that is okay, that can be acceptable, right? It is an examination of immeasurable proportions, so everything cannot be just prescribed, or everything cannot be just predicted like this. So it's not that easy, right? But yes, if you are able to tame in 80-90% paper, that is something good we can do, right? So paper 1, if you see, now paper 1 has some specific areas, okay, which we are going to obviously deal in our class, and these areas are recurrently asked, right? Like if you see paper 1, so your part A, the compulsory part, question 1, 2, 3, 4, let's say. So 1 is compulsory, 2, 3, 4 optional. But if you see part A of paper 1, fine, generally comprises, and recurrently you will see certain topics which are visible, fine. Now I'm not just talking about 16, 17, 18, I'm also talking about somewhere 5, 6, 7, 8, fine, 9, 10, 11, 12, leaving 13, 14, 15, right? So these topics are somewhere, right? Let us say we talk about the question 1. So recurrently you'll see a pattern of questions coming, fine. This pattern of questions are like generally question 1A or 1B or C. I'm talking about the first question, right? So you'll find number of questions which are asked from the scope, fine, and somewhere the significance, right? We are doing a general prediction, general trend, scope and significance of public administration. Now this is not a topic which is very simple and we can just jot down certain points and understand it. No, when we are talking about the scope and significance, right, we also add to this the present status, right? So scope, significance, which includes the present status. So if you understand obviously the scope of public administration, so how we are defining the scope of public administration, right? We take generally two things. One is the activity, fine, one is the academic or subject, fine, but this is not totally correct, fine. There is an organizational aspect also, that it is an organization. So if we are equating this to bureaucracy, which is the most desirable form of organization, right? So the scope of public administration, its study and its functioning includes the bureaucracy also, and the study or understanding of bureaucracy also. And if I say that, let me simplify it further, fine, it may include the study of civil services also. So you may find certain questions, you may find variety of questions coming from this perspective also. So you may be like, sometimes you may be astonished that, okay, why first question or the second question is just about civil services exactly. So it is not just about civil services, it is about the scope, right, of this. Significance, obviously we are talking about the increasing and decreasing significance of public administration, right? Now, when we're talking about increasing significance of public administration, let us say that countries like India, which are welfare states, obviously most of the modern democracies are welfare states, fine, but the logic is that when we talk about the developing countries, now this is a simple example which will help you understand how we interlink also, because that is also a very important aspect of interlinking. Now people say paper 1 and paper 2. Don't interlink paper 1 and paper 2. Fine. Interlink the concepts of paper 1 with the practical application of paper 2, or practical application of paper 2 with the concepts of paper 1. Fine. That is a more valid you can say categorization than saying paper 1 with paper 2. That linking, what does it mean linking? You cannot just mix the syllabus, right? So you have to understand that how we are doing it. Again, so welfare states, developing countries, right? In developing countries, you know that developing countries have variety of problems, right? And these variety of problems are complicated by, right? In fact, they become prominent, they become so pronounced, they become, you can say, more vulnerable because of the lack of strong administration. Right? So, because of lack of strong administration, these problems become more prominent in these countries. Right? Even though certain problems may be more or less overlapping with the developed countries also, but here, because of lack of strong administration, now here comes the conceptual divide. Fine. Here comes the branching out of the concept, right? How? So when I'm using the concept, when I'm using the term strong administration, now the examiner can simply manipulate this term strong administration in two ways. One, when we are saying the strong administration, fine, what do we mean a strong administration? Are we talking about the monopoly of the administration? Right? Are we talking about this monopoly of the administration? Right? No. We are not talking about strong administration in the sense that administration is very powerful and controlling and doing everything in the society. That we are not talking about. What we are talking about, that this administrative system is not in sync. It is not in relationship to the kind of problems these societies are witnessing. That this administrative system is little traditional, is more orthodox compared to the problems that are emerging. So it is not adapted to these problems, right? We are not talking about the monopoly strong. So we are talking about the strong in the sense of being adaptive, right? So now the examiner play through these words. A strong administrative system is necessary for good governance. See, significance of public administration. A strong administrative system is important for serving the needs of the backwards. Now here strong administrative system would reflect what? Now the vocabulary and its context is changing. The same term, fine. So strong administrative system here would mean it is talking about an administrative system which is not easily manipulated or politicized by the political system, which does not easily succumb to political pressures or becomes corrupt, right? At least this is understandable, right? So you see, so when we are talking about now this term significance, so significance, okay, can be understood with respect to what is the role of administration, how this role is changing, right? So now you see, this is one context. Welfare state, backward, minorities, vulnerable, tribals, poor people, okay, undernourished people, you can say lack of sustainable resources, lack of livelihood. There are so many problems which are there. Pandemic and corona has obviously given us this clear indication that how the administration has failed miserably, but in spite of that fact, the administration has been the binding force. Fine. Failure is a different aspect, but its existence, fine, its importance in ensuring that things work, whether they work in an extraordinary manner or not, that is a different aspect. But if not administration, then what? We don't have any other alternative. Yeah, individuals may have come, institutions may have come, private sector has come, fine. PM Cares Fund received funds from many people, a lot of funds came to it, and obviously government also had to somewhere go out of its own way, out of its usual finances and revenue, and seek the benefit of those people, whether corporates or corporate social responsibility, and likewise or philanthropic fundings. Government has to seek all that, but you can say that itself has opened a can of worms, that okay, how vulnerable we can be. In spite of knowing, or in spite of having a strong intelligence network, we failed to somewhere comprehend the impact of such kind of diseases or such kind of globalization induced pandemics, right? We have failed, or we failed miserably to understand it. Fine. When in the March the lockdown started, and before that when the Trump came to Gujarat, and likewise whatever happened. So because of certain events, and when one of the cases was initially detected in China, right, somewhere around November, December, and the WHO obviously played a very strong part in hiding it. But you can understand that this globalization, or this comprehending that this spread could have wreaked havoc for countries like India, where livelihood and security are a big issue, and people have to earn every day to survive, right? The per capita income statistics are there in front of us. Fine. The unemployment rate, which was one of the highest, okay, that government should have taken into consideration. Fine. The lack of industrial productivity, that was very clear. Dominance of the unorganized sector, that was also very clear. So government should have, right? Let us not deviate from the topic. So we are talking about that. Okay, yes, when we talked about this context significance, now in a way the significance is also reducing. Why? Because today we are talking about market and globalization. Now see, this is a topic, and which is probably the second last, or the second third last topic of your unit 1. Fine. But the logic is that it can be very easily related to this. So significance, and how this significance is changing. If the administration is the basis for the civilization, fine, W.B. Donham's definition, very important. Or if the administration is the moral agent, Ordway Tedd's definition. Or if you can say administration from womb to womb to tomb, it protects us, it is there always. Okay, for that matter, if the administration is the implementation of the will of the state, like Wilson and Goodenough statement, if we see their significance of administration, right, again we cannot undermine that it has a very strong role to play in managing, in prospering, in evolving of a society, fine, or in the evolution of a society. So globalization and market, now these are two major developments which have somewhere decreased the significance of public administration as a system, fine, and even as an area of study to a large extent, fine, and also it has increased also, right? So if we take globalization and market as one perspective, and we take governance as another perspective. So when we talk about governance, we are not saying that its role, its significance has totally diluted, it has changed. And when we talk about globalization and market perspective, we are saying the role has changed, significance has not totally diminished, significance has diminished to an extent, but still because of the need of good governance or governance, the importance has not died down. So when we are talking about the corporate frauds, when we are talking about the stock market scams, when we are talking about the pandemic, when we are talking about the health administration, when we are talking about private sector, the unemployment, the removal of a lot of people from the organization, fine, and the government has to bear or somewhere has to protect them. So when we are talking about all these aspects, fine, we have to understand that administration and its role has certainly become more important. So as a perspective of governance, right, the significance has improved. As a perspective of globalization, the significance has improved. As a perspective of market, the role has drastically reduced, but significance has not. So in a way, the significance has increased, not decreased. Right? The functions and the role may have decreased, right? So when people say that, okay, government should be less unbusinesslike, Wilson's statement, right? Government should have no business in business, right? That is not true. The government's role or the government's business is to regulate the businesses in the context of globalization, in the context of market reforms, right? So if you are treating this topic in a very simple manner, that significance is about reading these things, regulatory, administration, this administration, obviously your answer would become much inferior compared to what the examiner did. Obviously that answer would have been more suitable in 2008 and 9, but not now. A lot of literature has come, a lot of writings have come, a lot of content has come on that, right? So let us say this is one very important area, okay, which is recurrently asked, but you have to understand that in a broader context, right? Now this is also a very irritating part, right? A status, present status, right? Present status. What is present status? What do you understand by present status? Are we talking about the subject of public administration, the discipline of public administration, or we are talking about the organization, the system of administration? So if we have public-private partnerships as the way forward, right? If we have joint ventures or joint enterprises as the way forward, fine. If we are converting number of departments or we are privatizing, privatization is the way forward. Government is selling its stake in the profit-making PSUs also, right? Government considers the traditional government machinery as a burden, fine, as a, you can say, restriction on the growth and development of the country, right? So governments themselves are becoming allergic to the government, understanding? So we have a perspective that if we think of all these aspects, then what is happening? That governance enforces or influences the governance influences the government's fear of the administration. Now see, this statement becomes little complicated, right? And you might feel like, kya pucha hai? What is this asked? So governance influences the government's fear of administration. Right? Now it simply means that government itself as a system does not want to expand. It does not want to create more administrative systems. It does not want to create more administrative organizations and then somewhere you can say initiate or achieve the goals of the society. It is trying to limit its role as far as possible. It is shying away from, right? It is moving out of this extraordinary, or you can say this gigantic system which the colonial masters had created. It is trying to reduce it itself. And why it is trying to reduce itself? Because it knows that there is a heavy price to be paid. There is a lot of burden, there is a lot of financial burden, there is a lot of regulatory burden, there are a lot of legal burdens, right? There are a lot of accountability issues related to them. So if we just carry on with them, we'll have to spend a lot of money and resources and time in managing a system which is not delivering us the required product. That is what is known as the cost benefit analysis, right? So if we talk about the present status, so the present status has to be understood, right, with respect to these aspects, right? So when we say, okay, theoretically, yes, present status is what, if we link it to, people से present status जो है NPA से पता चलेगा, but NPA क्या है? It is more with respect to American administration, right? It is with respect to American society, right? It is not with respect to Indian society, it is not with respect to developing society, it is more with respect to developed societies like USA, right? New public administration. So people come with this idea that NPA 3, fine, that is not totally correct, right? NPA 3 has global orientation, no doubt. It talks about many other things. It talks about methodological pluralism, it talks about diversity, it talks about accommodation of the developing countries and societies, and likewise it talks about these things. But the idea is that it is mostly oriented towards the reforms in American society and American administrative system, right? The present status that we have to see, we have to also see with respect to, right, the initiatives like pro-people good governance in developing countries, right? We have to see its status with respect to the administrative reforms which we have initiated, right? We have to see it with respect to the, right, with respect to the democratic decentralization, right? The local government, so local governance reforms that we do today, right? The increasing role of the NGOs, the self-help groups, the community-based organizations, or for that matter SHG federations that are coming, right? Or when we see the Kerala model of development, the Kerala model of inclusive participation, inclusive development, right? Gujarat's model of economic development, though these two models may not be compared, okay, in terms of being adversary, in terms of being opposite to each other. It should not be compared this way. This is not the right approach because both have their own pros and cons, right? But when we talk about the other northeastern states and when we talk about the fiscal stimulus, the fiscal push that the governments are making, right? The kind of packages that are being coming for the backward areas, for the northeastern areas, northeastern states, for the Naxal affected areas, right? The kind of fiscal stimulus and the packages that the government is promoting, fine, or whether we talk about the backward regions grant fund, which has been obviously modified over the time. When we talk about the planning, the Niti Ayog's roadmap, right? Long-term framework of development, right? And when we talk about all these things, fine, we realize that this present status of public administration, fine, even as a subject and even as a system, has drastically changed in the third world perspective in the developing countries, right? We are no more third world. We cannot say we are totally third world, but yes, the pandemic has made us realize that we are, right? But we can say that yes, we are more or less in the transitional phase, fine, and we are into the moderate category as of now, right? So you can say that yes, the question which comes in the question paper 1, obviously it will be more with respect to American public administration, but for what you say linking or linkage of paper 2, okay, we have to bring the perspective of the Indian administration also, or Indian society as such, right? There are a lot of reforms we have initiated. कर्मयोगी जो है वो भी एक योजना है, okay, NPS system है, then 7th pay commission के recommendations हैं, right? Then fiscal federalism, there are a lot of changes we have brought about. Then we talk about the local level administration, the district level administration, and the district planning models that we have changed or modified or evolved, or we are improving on that, right? Then if we talk about this intra-state relationships, okay, especially regional councils in the Niti Aayog, then interstate is there, intrastate is there, then center state is there, fine. Then you can also say that the government and corporate relationship, all these have changed and modified to an extent. So when we are talking about administrative reform, one is looking at the study of administration, one is looking at the system of administration, and one is looking at the administration that we are doing, how we are administering the society. So it is quite obvious that the authority still is with the government and the government systems, and they are the ones who are making the headways in the societies, whether directly or indirectly, right? So see this topic. Now this is one way of understanding this particular topic. So this has come quite frequently, and now see it covers variety of things that we talk about, variety of other topics that are there in your syllabus. So see, how is it complicated? It is not complicated, it is simple. And that is the best thing about public administration. Just like if you're trying to untie your sweater, right, you want to remove the threads of your sweater or any t-shirt you're wearing, fine. So you take one thread, fine, one corner of the thread, and start taking it out, and slowly the entire garment comes out, or entire, you can say, the sweater or the t-shirt becomes gets converted to the fibers, right? So it is the same way. If you just have one end, slowly you can reach to the last end, right? And this is where we miss this bus, which is where we miss the point of understanding public administration. So it is not difficult, it is simple, and if we keep this as our focus, which does not require a lot of effort. So if we keep this as the focus, that we have to somewhere keep this, or you have to keep this in the mind or in our understanding, that we have to start from one end and end up to the other end. If we do it, it's simple, right? So let us say this is one very important topic which comes here, fine, paper 1. Then second topic which is frequently asked in paper 1 is the evolution. Now evolution, one is to be understood in terms of phases, right? Phases of evolution, which are there, different phases of evolution that we know. Then one has to be understood with respect to the paradigms. Okay, the 6 paradigms of Nicholas Henry, right, in which we can add 2 more from our side, right? 2 more just to give it a better understanding. Those 6 paradigms, initially 5 and then 6 paradigms by Nicholas Henry. He has already talked about it, fine. So it can be understood with respect to this. Then we can also understand the evolution in terms of 2 by 2 matrix, right? In case a comparison of like the paradigms given by Nicholas Henry, right, and 2 by 2 matrix given by Golumbiewiczki. So very briefly, because 2 by 2 matrix has not been asked for a long time, fine, but that can be one specific focus. Comparison of Golumbiewiczki and Nicholas Henry can be done, which is a very basic concept, right? If they ask directly 2 by 2, then that is also quite simple. 4 phases are there, right? But we need to know it in a very basic manner, right? We can always increase the content by linking a scholar with another scholar, fine. If we talk about Golumbiewiczki and then we link Golumbiewiczki with Nicholas Henry, so your content will increase, right? So you can qualitatively add your content that way also. It's not just you must need to know Golumbiewiczki, right? It is how you are tracing your answer that is more important. So that also we'll learn obviously while we are discussing various questions and the various topics in the syllabus. So 2 by 2 matrix, right? Nicholas Henry, right? This is also one important area. Then when we talk about evolution, we may also talk about the epistemology. Right? This is a very typical term which has been used also in the examination, right? You know, this is something, the philosophy or source of knowledge, right? I would simplify it and say it is like the value premise, right? It is like the value premise. Okay, what is the value behind this? What is the value? What are the basic values and ideals behind something? Fine. So we can trace it to two major sources. One, the Francophone system, and other is the Anglophone system. The Francophone system and Anglophone system, basically the contributors are mostly white and Waldo, who have tried to study it. LD White and Dwight Waldo. Name yaad rahe, अच्छा है, नहीं रहे तो भी it's okay. Doesn't matter much, right? So we can talk about the evolution in this aspect also. Now this is a different culture and this is a different culture, right? We are talking, now many questions are asked here on this aspect also. Like the question once 2016 I think, on the British civil services, value system of the British civil services, right? Now people got scared, this is from the hidden syllabus. It is not from the hidden syllabus. Fine, it's better to understand from the evolution or from the comparative public administration, CPA, yeah, evolution. Fine, both the areas can cater to that question. Fine. So when we talk about this Anglophone system, the Anglophone system mostly dominates the UK, USA, and even countries like India. The Francophone system is basically France and Germany, right? So you have to simplify and understand it that, okay, yeah, what basic values kya hai? Democracy is considered very important, democratic value system, right? Wilson talks about the idea in his, just now Wilson is also important part of this. So Wilson talks about his idea of the democratic conservatism, right? If you know about it, so Wilson talks about democratic conservatism. The democratic conservatism simply reflects that the traditional values associated with democracy, the inherent tendency to protect and promote democracy and democratic value system, right? It somewhere overpowers or somewhere you can say regulates the growth of independent, professional, free and fair public administration systems. So democracy and democratic values are given more importance than having a professional public administration system, right? So this come from these value system. The Francophone system obviously is more oriented towards the independence of civil services system, the independence of administrative system, where the administrative system is considered to be almost equivalent to the other organs of the government or state, you can say. And Napoleonic codes which regulated or which improved the growth of French civil services system, fine. So codification of laws, you know, how we codify each and every aspect, civil services conduct rules, fine. Their ethical, legal and other conduct, everything is regulated by law, and they believe that this kind of regulation will promote a kind of accountability towards the rule of law within the public administration system, and there is no need for too much of external control or external accountability through the government or the parliament. Fine. So if that is restricted, then we'll have a professional civil services which is autonomous also and at the same time regulated also, right? So they have a different value system, right? Then so you have to somewhere distinguish between them. Okay, so many questions have been asked on this idea also. Okay, like 16 we talked about, right? In general also they ask many other questions, right? That they use Wilson's name and they can ask a question, and they can also ask us to distinguish between the importance of the study of public administration, right, in these two kinds of philosophical frameworks, right? So this can be very important aspect, right? Then we have in the evolution the importance of the contribution of Wilson and Goodnow, right? So a lot of other questions are also added to that, like Wilson, when we are talking about evolution part. So Wilson is asked, fine, variety of questions on dichotomy can be phrased, right? Variety of questions on dichotomy can be phrased, fine. Also Wilson's model of comparison, Wilson's approach towards comparison, right? So when they are talking about evolution, so Wilson's essay and his contribution and Goodnow's contribution both can be asked, right? Also the dichotomy perspective, and when the dichotomy is asked, then many other things can be related to this. For example, dichotomy as the basis of a value-free, as basis of value-free scientific study of public administration, right? Dichotomy as the basis of business orientation, right? Dichotomy as the basis of business orientation, dichotomy as the basis of you can say the public private debate, right, or public private convergence, both can be understood, right? Dichotomy as the basis of, right, accountability, right? So dichotomy as the basis of accountability, right? Then dichotomy as the basis of the constitutionalism, right? Constitutionalism, you understand, constitutional reforms and constitutionalism. Right, constitutional reforms and constitutionalism, this is also one very important aspect. Then dichotomy as the basis of administrative ethics, right? Professionalism in civil services and administrative ethics, right? So there are various perspectives which can be related to this when we talk about Wilson and Goodnow. There can be a comparison between Wilson and Goodnow also, right? There can also be a criticism of the Wilson. Why Wilson? Like the question has been asked that should Wilson be called as the father of public administration? If yes, why? If not, why? Right? And should Goodnow be called as the father of public administration than Wilson? This can also be one perspective. And how do you assess the relative contribution, the merits and demerits of the Wilson and Goodnow's contribution to the evolution of public administration? Right? Then it can also be a question that okay, Wilson contributed more to the emergence of analytic or intellectual dichotomy, whereas Goodnow contributed more to the emergence of the concrete dichotomy. Fine. This can also be one aspect which can be asked. Fine. Then dichotomy or the lateral antenna, let's say you are talking about paper 2 को कैसे link किया जाए. See, now concepts, if you understand, then it becomes easy. So if I say that okay, lateral entry, now paper 2 में ये question पूछा गया in a different form. right? That lateral entry will promote, it has been argued that lateral entry will promote politicization, right? So lateral entry, right, can also be asked here. Now paper 2 can be directly added to this or linked to this, and it can be asked that, okay, lateral entry is one of the manifestations of the dichotomy, right? So somewhere lateral entry is increasing the dichotomy perspective of public administration, or dichotomy within the public administration, right? Or is based on the perspective of the dichotomy, right? So lateral entry, increasing role of specialists. Now see how they will confuse you. So they will say, okay, the provision for lateral entry, provision for increasing role of specialists and diluting the generalist character in the civil services is basically neo-Wilsonian in nature, right? Now this neo-Wilsonian will confuse you. What is neo-Wilsonian? Obviously it is talking about the revival of the ideas of Wilson, the revival of the basic concepts or the core concepts of Wilson, right? So this is an important aspect related to evolution, that how we have to interpret the evolution, right? Also when we talk about evolution of the subject with respect to the Western and non-Western cultures, fine. When we talk about in the Western culture, it can be European and American evolution, and in the non-Western culture, it can be more of the evolution in generally the countries like India, or you can say we can talk about the traditional China, right? So obviously there were certain countries more traditional, religion dominated, and there how the administrative studies and administrative systems emerged, fine, and how you can say academically the knowledge regarding it evolved or developed over the time. Do we still have a non-Western tradition or a non-Western knowledge regarding administration? Now when we talk about globalization today, it is impossible to understand that the administrative system and its knowledge is divided into Western and non-Western today, right? There is a lot of influence and there is a lot of commingling, there is a lot of convergence and a lot of overlapping between the developed and the developing countries today. The cultural integration is also taking place. Okay, burger is as normal here as it is there, right? The clothing, the lifestyle, the food patterns, the diseases, fine, they are also more or less common here and there. So hardly we can distinguish between them now. Yeah, there are a number of issues which are visible here. So we have we witness you can say the women inclusion in military today, right? Women as the officers in the combat and the artillery also today, and we are witnessing the Hathras case also, right? So we have like an extreme composition of this society, fine, where at one side we see the women emerging as a very powerful symbol of growth and change, and in other side we still see that women have been women are treated as still as a symbol of repression or as a symbol of traditional value system, fine, or as more or less just a symbol of the house and nothing more than that, right? So there has been a very good analysis by an IAS officer, okay, I think Hima Das Gupta. She has tried to understand how the Ishwar Judge Aluwalia, the female, that's quite famous, the symbol of empowerment in India, and many other females like who have who have evolved, fine, with the change of the Indian society. Like most of them were born prior to independence and now they are in the late 70s or 80s, right? And they have become the symbols of this change, right? So when we think of India or countries like India, we witness such kind of transformation, such kind of extremities, that in one place we are witnessing this and this. So when you are thinking of the impact of globalization on the evolution, right, we have to also understand it in this broader perspective. that there have been lot of similarities which have been emerging between the developed and developing countries, and so more or less the administrative changes or reforms, right, they have been able to accommodate these similarities, right? So administrative systems are also somewhere evolving on that line, that okay, we have to eventually witness the problems which are visible in the developed societies, so we will also modify ourselves that way, right? But when we talk about these extremities, right, this kind of extreme backwardness or this kind of problems and issues which are there in India or very peculiar to countries like India, then we have to rethink, okay, that how the administration is going to balance this role of traditional interlocutor between various communities and diverse regions in this country, and at the same time how it will play the role of an evolved you can say professional and more you can say sophisticated administrator dealing with variety of problems which the developed countries are witnessing, right? So you can say this is like India of transition, this is like India of you can say transformative stage which India is going through, right? So we have to understand that way, and then we can interpret it this way, that okay, yes, these changes are also somewhere impacting the evolution. Okay, globalization and all those things have modified many things today, right? We are witnessing certain good things, we are witnessing certain bad things, and e-commerce, technology, and likewise. Now pandemic there has been an analysis and study by the government itself, fine, and it says that I think ISS, Institute of Social Sciences, fine, so it is saying that around there has been a drastic reduction in the around 23.7% reduction in the NREGA employment, or in the employment under NREGA to the women participants of the rural areas, okay, mainly because of the migrant population going back, right? Now pandemic has overburdened women, right? They have to now take up a strong household role also, okay, they are overburdened with many things, the instances of domestic violence have increased, right? And their role or labor participation, female labor participation rate drastically reduced by somewhere around 24% in the rural areas, especially in the NREGA. Now how do you visualize that NREGA was about inclusive growth? NREGA was about at least creating an equivalent share of women in the rural employment, right? So drastically reduced, in the sense we are not saying women are not willing, women are not eager, or women are restricted by the circumstances, okay, to demand the work. They are not. So you have to understand this holistic, this practical scenario of, let us say, India or Indian administration or Indian society, fine, before you just simply use this concept to to be added to the example of the Indian context. So see, paper 2 comes naturally if you understand the things, right? So justice delivery, and there are so many areas where this can be understood. So this is one very important area which is frequently asked, and this has to be understood very well, right? The third important aspect is area which is frequently asked is your NPA and NPM, right? More frequent than public choice approach. So public choice approach has to be understood, but it can be little restricted. NPA and NPM are very frequently asked. Now earlier the nature of questions, like if you see from 2010 onwards till 2015, right, or even in 9-10, if you see 8, 9, 10 also, 8 they modified the syllabus, no doubt, but NPM was already there. So if you see the nature of question, they were very technical around NPM, right? Research papers, so questions from research papers were also included, right? NPM is dead, long live digital era governance. Okay, then in 2009 another paper was presented which asked, is NPM really dead? Fine. So 2004, somebody came up with this, or 2002-3 came up with this perspective. Patrick Dunleavy, NPM is dead, long live distal era governance, right? So, okay, earlier the questions were more theoretical. Fine. Now you will see the questions are more analytical, fine, plus practical, or plus you can say applied. Right? Market centered approach 2018 का क्वेश्चन है, इस 2018 क्वेश्चन. Market centered approach and citizen centered approach. How do they differ? What are the specific values related to them? Right? So NPM, new public management, now they are not asking about some theoretical aspects always. Right? Like we talk about the reinventing government movement or 10 commandments. Right? 10 commandments are simply the classification of entrepreneurial government that Osborne and Gabler they do. So the questions are generally here now about NPM, and not just theoretical, but it is more applied. So NPM can be asked in the context of the reforms in administration. Right? What kind of reforms were visualized under NPM? Right? How was NPM different from traditional bureaucracy? Right? Or what were the features of the new public management? Fine. And what are the overlapping features of the new public management and the bureaucratic model? This can also be one question, conceptual. Right? Applied question, okay, what has been the impact of NPM on developing countries? Right? What has been the experience of NPM for the developing countries? Do you think the changes like new public management, okay, will be wholeheartedly accepted by the traditional bureaucracy in the developing societies? Right? These are more or less opinion-based questions. They are basically analytical questions. They cannot have a defined content, right? But we can obviously understand them with respect to certain specific points and specific aspects that we can highlight. Right? So if we highlight those specific points and specific aspects, whether some dimensions or whether some issues and some examples, fine, our answer is over. That is what we need. Because these questions will pose a lot of problems always to you in terms of content, in terms of understanding, right? So let us not make it too complicated, right? We can define it in a very easy manner, right? So administrative reforms, new public management. What are the reforms initiated under NPM? Now second ARC also talks about new public management reforms. Now see, what linkage you want between paper 1 and paper 2? The linkage between paper 1 and paper 2 already there, right? So second ARC talks about new public management reforms. Fine. Second ARC talks about business process re-engineering. This is also a kind of reform, precursor to NPM. Fine. New public management has its own pitfalls. It has its own decline. It has its own criticism in the form of new public service. Okay, Den Hart and Den Hart. Right? So all the techniques, okay, whether there has been a decline of NPM in developing countries or not, right? So there are a lot of aspects which we can discuss regarding this. A lot of research papers have been published. A lot of people, current scholars have contributed to that. Obviously this requires a little bit of studying beyond your book and syllabus, right? So this new public management comes here, right? And new NPM, then you know about Taylorism, right? Or neo-Taylorism and NPM. This question is also frequently asked, right? NPM and neo-Taylorism, NPM as neo-managerialism, right? NPM as the panacea for all the problems of the traditional bureaucracy. Fine. Then NPM is linked with digital era governance, and it is asked. Fine. E-governance and NPM. Right. So e-governance also comes frequently. Right. Now NPA and NPM. Right. So NPA was also a kind of paradigm. It was a new change. It was a new concept. Fine. It was a new outlook altogether when it comes. And NPM was also a kind of change. So when we are comparing these two, both were like a revolution. Fine. Both were initiated by or initiated because of the need for change required in the traditional administrative study as well as the practice. Right? What scholars were studying and what they were doing. So there was an immense need of transforming the existent administrative studies and the system both. Both come with this perspective. Right? Both have the elements of new. Right? At least 2/3 of the part is same. New public, new public. One is about administration, one is about management. One brings it closer to the society, democracy. One talks about bringing it closer to the market, to the management aspect. Fine. That means you can say concern is efficiency, concern is equity, concern is inclusion. Here, concern is productivity, right? Cost benefit analysis, more equity, justice, and all those things. Right? So both have common elements, right? Both are products of somewhere revolutions. Both were products of the problems and the vacuum which was created because of traditional studies, right? But they have their own differences. When we talk about the value system of NP and value system of NPM, for example, you can say when you talk about lateral entry. So when you talk about a civil servant, an IS officer, a traditional bureaucrat, right? Or you can say an original bureaucrat, the civil servants. And then you talk about the neo bureaucrat, the new bureaucrat. Right? This is also a very important perspective that lateral entry, the experts, the specialists will become neo bureaucrats. Eventually they will also become bureaucratic, right? So probably the entire purpose of including the lateral entrants or specialized people into the system will be defeated because of that, right? But that's okay. That is a different debate, right? So the logic is that when we are talking about the new public administration and the new public management, right? So imagine this way that you have a traditional bureaucrat, or so in the lateral entry when you have a traditional bureaucrat and when you have an expert, a lateral entrant or a specialist. So specialist is coming from the values of the market. Right? It is NPM's one of the important agenda is to include more and more specialists in administration. Right? So basically lateral entry is one of the agendas of NPM. Right? So you have a specialist coming from the values of the market. Right? And one who is already there, he has been trained, he has been nurtured, he has been polished with the attitude and the value system of democracy. You have to serve. Right? Yes, first you have to serve yourself and then you have to serve the society, but you have to serve. Right? So they come with this perspective. Right? Charity begins at home, but we have to do charity. Fine. So let us first fill our pockets. Let us first fill our banks and then we'll talk about people. But yes, we will talk about people. We come with this perspective that we are saviors of the society. We are the moral guardians of the society. Right? Moral policing or moral administration. So we are basically guardians of the society and we are to protect the democracy and democratic value system. Right? Now what? These people will say that it's okay. Fine. My role is to provide good services. My role is to provide quality services in time frame. 30 minutes में मुझे pizza देना है. Right? I have to deliver this pizza in 30 minutes. It should be steaming hot. Fine. It should be tasty, it should be crisp, it should be this, it should be that, it should be that. But I have to deliver that pizza and after that my role is over. And I have to earn my incentive. Right? But I have to deliver it. Now this is also a very good perspective that service will be delivered on time with the best of quality. But what is the value system? The value is that I am not bothered about I'm not bothered. I have to deliver good service. I have to deliver it to the customer. The customer must be happy. Fine. But I am not bothered about beyond that what happens. Until the customer comes to me with a complaint or a grievance, I will resolve it. I will resolve it in time. Fine. And I'll satisfy the customer. That's it. But I don't have to have a moral relationship with the customer. I don't need to have some obligation, constitutional obligations like the public servants have. I don't need to have all that. I have service obligations. I have contractual obligations. I have obligations what is written in that slip. Fine. Where the payment has been made. Fine. Only those obligations I follow. But I don't have a moral obligation. अब तुमने पिज्जा खाया नहीं खाया मुझे क्या मतलब है? Fine. You got it or you did not get it. I don't care. Fine. Did you steal someone's money and then order the pizza? I don't care. Right? Fine. So now, but that is the concern for the traditional administration. Now he is concerned with that. He has to poke the nose everywhere. Right? He is too nosy about your life. But that is because, okay, he takes his role as that of a guardian, though it should not be that way. They have to serve. But logic is that having a moral guardianship also somewhere needs or somewhere influences their behavior, their responsiveness, their sensitivity towards the people. Fine. So some people are standing on the road. Fine. Let's say 2, 4, 5 people are standing on the road and probably there is no light, but there is a house adjacent to that. Now a police wala is going, right? Or an officer is going, beat officer is going. Okay, he will be concerned about that. That why you people are standing here? What is the issue? What do you want? Now this is a concern. Right? This is a kind of responsiveness, sensitivity, which is nurtured through training in the civil servants. But when you talk about the training here, right, they are more trained in service delivery. They are more trained in hospitality. Right? So hostility versus hospitality is also one important perspective. Hostility coming from here, hospitality coming from here. But this hostility itself is based on certain premises. Right? It is a fear. It creates a fear, no doubt. But people, okay, value and respect the traditional administration for its greater concern beyond the economic cost and benefit analysis. Okay, but they are not. So there are various differences which come. Right? There are various paradoxes even when you talk about ethics in governance and when you talk about new public management model. So NPM model is more based on the ends, the consequences. It creates good consequences, but for whom? Not the purpose. So NPM basically wanted to increase the overall satisfaction of the society, overall benefit to the society, but it finally focuses only on the means, the instruments, improves the instruments and believes that the goals will be achieved very well. Right? That is what the idea is. Right? The traditional administration basically wanted to achieve certain goals, but it did not have the adequate means. It did not improve the means for doing so. Fine. So it tried to achieve the goal somehow. Right? But you can say when we talk about ethical principles here, right, both have certain moral duties. Right? Their moral duties is based on the business principles, right, which is not just profit and money. Their moral principles are based on the constitutional or the democratic principles, which is not just about serving, but it is also about serving with a human face, and serving with a moral aptitude, serving with a moral perspective, right, owning the responsibility. Right. So certain kinds of questions which come around this idea, okay, market perspective, market management, corporatized state, you will see a lot of questions are there based on this. So the corporate state, the new corporate state, the new market governance, mine desires the NPM attributes or NPM like attributes than the new public administration attributes. So when we compared it, NPA was more social, NPA was more normative, NPA was more value based, whereas NPM was more technical, NPM was more professional, NPM was more value free, it was that technically more scientific and less social, right? So you can compare them and think of a lot of questions being designed around this idea. So NP and NPM, they are also quite frequently asked in your part A of paper 1, right? And then you have public choice approach or public choice theory. Fine. So I remember in 2015-16, a question was asked, and we took up this discussion in our quality improvement program, QIP, that we used to take then. So, with this program became quite popular also, and in that program I had discussed one important topic. Though people did not at that time did not consider it as very important, but that question came in the examination itself, that the difference between the approach and the theory. Right? Can public choice be called as an approach, or public choice should be called as theory? Right? Approach is more flexible. Approach is a conceptual framework. It is a framework to understand things, but it is not rigid. It does not come with a conclusion. Right? Theory is more about conclusion. Theory is more about universal knowledge. Right? Theory is about non-changing something. Right? Something which we develop in the context-free approach. Right? That means it can be applied here and also applied there also. Right? Society to society, it may be more or less applicable. So there is a universal appeal to theory. Right? Whereas approach can be more contextual. It can be limited to certain societies, to certain areas and regions only. Right? Now that was the question which was asked. So public choice theory and public choice approach, this is also a very important area where specific focus is related to find the core concepts. Right? Core concepts are generally asked. Fine. Then the contribution of scholars. Especially if you see the examination more focuses on Niskanen. Right? But in 16 they had asked a new scholar, but he's not a new scholar, but his name generally doesn't come much. Right? So Niskanen. Fine. Then they are concerned with Downs, Anthony Downs, but they had asked Patrick Dunleavy. Right? Bureau shaping model. Right? Patrick Dunleavy's bureau shaping model, which was asked. Right? It is given in Mohit Bhattacharya little bit, and then Uma Madhuri's book is also there where it is given. It is also given in Alka Dhamija's book, where you don't need to read all that much, but yes, bureau shaping model was asked. Mostly Mohit Bhattacharya book we can find it. Right, and so Niskanen, Downs and Patrick Dunleavy, fine. And then public choice approach with respect to public policy is also asked. Now you can understand public policy is generally your unit 7, 8, somewhere 8, and this is your first unit. So they mix and match and ask the question. They have asked once the question on Pareto optimality, but this was like an odd one out. Generally people won't understand it, they will not study it, but it is very simple question if you have studied Nicholas Henry, no doubt, or for that matter you can say if you have studied the concept of public interest, and which you generally study for ethics also. In the ethics also they have asked public interest, philosophies of public interest, which we study generally in public administration. Right? So they have asked Pareto optimality, they link this to public choice. Right? They also link it to the criticism of the state. It is a criticism of the state. Right? If you see, in essence, if you have heard about the critical theory, then public choice approach, public choice theory is also a kind of critical theory. Fine. Your critical theory is a perspective which has been obviously initiated by people like Marx, neo-Marxist and Marxist. Right? So Marx basically talks about conflicts. Marx basically talks about the exploitation that exists in the society and the root cause for all the social evolution as the exploitation or the difference between one group and the other. Right? So this relationship of exploitation which exists between two different groups as dialectics that Marx talks about as the basis for the evolution of societies. Right? Whether you talk about traditional society, in traditional society obviously there would not be that kind of conflict, but when you talk about feudal societies, when you talk about estate system, when you talk about the pre-capitalist the mercantile system or pre-capitalist system, or when you talk about the capitalist system, when you talk about the even the post-capitalist or post-industrial societies today, right? The service societies also, there is a class system which emerges. So neo-Marxist come there and Marxist come there. So when we are studying public choice approach, critical theory, we can link this to critical theory, and we can also study the Marxist and neo-Marxist approaches, right? Ideological approaches, right? Habermas, Jürgen Habermas, the supporter of critical perspective, Marx contribution, public choice, and the scholars of public choice. Fine. One more scholar becomes very important for public choice if you're studying it. That is the Ostrom. Fine. So Vincent Ostrom becomes very important. Ostrom talks about democratic administration, and compared to other public choice scholars, Ostrom is little different. Fine. He wrote a very famous book, Intellectual Crisis in American Public Administration, 1974. So Intellectual Crisis in American Public Administration basically talked about that how the administration system, how the public administration needs a revival, needs a reform. Fine. And for that matter, there is a need to understand the nature of this reform which is needed. And we cannot simply talk about reform in terms of techniques and privatization. We need to somewhere understand that there is lack of knowledge, there is lack of content, there is lack of understanding of what public administration is and should be. So he has talked about political accountability, Ostrom, political accountability of administration, right? Legislative control over administration, public participation in administration. He's talked about all these things. Now, if you understand this simple logic, you can also somewhere understand that Ostrom, even though he's supporter of the public choice, which is talking about reducing the government monopoly and the role of bureaucracy in the society and replacing it by the market forces, right? By the alternatives. So somewhere his ideas seem to have consonance, or for that matter resonance, with the Wilson's perspective, right? Somewhere there is a connection between new public administration and public choice approach also, right? Now this is where you have to explore, this is where you have to understand things. So this revision program will be basically focusing on those aspects, right? And we'll take up obviously other areas. We'll take 2 days, almost 2.5 days to review the entire syllabus and the perspective that will be covered in this QRP program, whether paper 1, paper 2, and paper 2 will become more interesting when we explore various areas and how we are going to link paper 1 with paper 2. And I would say obviously not linking one paper with the another, but linking the concept, linking the common aspect, the common concepts of paper 1 with the common concepts of paper 2, and how we can supplement each other, the paper 1 with paper 2 or paper 2 with paper 1. So how we can improve the quality of our answers, quality of our understanding for both the papers. Okay, that will be our approach to dealing with this program. Fine. So thank you so much for your participation. For today, we'll just stop it here. Fine. See you again in the next class. Thank you so much.